Thank you. I don't want to steal the thunder of all the speakers, but I specifically asked to do this reflection knowing it would be on the heels of the election. And, I come from the Jewish tradition where people uh, who give speeches kind of do what's called a pilpul. You kind of draw out a ethical lesson from some quotes from the prophets or the Bible. And the prophets I want to refer to today are the latter day prophets of Martin Luther King, who said more than half a century ago that this nation was approaching spiritual death. And Malcolm X, who said that he does not see an American dream, but an American nightmare. And I want to extend on those thoughts with my comments about the election. I delayed writing this reflection until after midnight last night or early this morning as I write, which was going into 2 a.m. The election of a president has not as yet been accomplished, even though a clear and insurmountable majority of all the votes cast for the office has been won by one of the two major candidates. The very fact that the outcome is still unclear, and it's still unclear even this morning, although Biden now has a lead in Pennsylvania and Georgia. The fact that the outcome is still unclear is a measure of the bizarrely undemocratic nature of the US electoral, political, and governmental system. Not only the absurd winner-take-all state-by-state mechanism of the Electoral College, but the unrepresentative, racist, and disproportionate nature of the allocation of electoral votes to each state based on the sum of congressional seats and Senate seats for each state, so that states smaller in population than the city of Los Angeles get free electoral votes. It may be that unlike the elections in 2000 and the election in 2016, that the actual winner of the popular vote will also win the office of the presidency, but that is not yet definite and not a given. A few hundred votes one way or the other could tip Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, or Pennsylvania to the opposite outcome. What becomes clear in this election is why we sit still for this. Because the United States is a deeply flawed society rooted in the material realities and the psychological and social and spiritual manifestations of the lie of white supremacy, the belief that so-called white people are superior to other so-called races of people, and that the only true Americans are white. Even the very term white supremacy to describe that social system, culture, and psychological makeup is a lie. It is not white supremacy, but white depravity. Because the clear belief and value system of at least half of the US electorate is depraved. This depravity is manifested in a lack of social responsibility, empathy, or concern in the midst of a pandemic. It is seen in a religious belief system that views the living embodiment of the 7 deadly sins as a God-sent agent of divine will. What other word than depravity accurately describes the conscious determination that the maintenance of the entire ecosystem and the planetary basis for life itself is less important than good-paying jobs in the energy extraction industry, low taxes on corporations and the wealthy, and rising stock prices? Where is the televangelist or preacher today who will say that 250,000 dead and 100,000 new cases of COVID-19 a day is God's judgment of the United States of America for its sins of avarice, arrogance, and racism? The tremendous political and spiritual power and impact of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, despite the differences between them, arose because they were both self-critical individually and collectively of their own people, as well as unrelenting and uncompromising in their commitment to justice, equality, and rights, and in their critique of the system that oppressed and exploits Black people. Where is there the equivalent today on the scene anywhere among so-called white people or white political or religious leaders? White people who address issues of white supremacy, white privilege, white complicity are denounced as being the police of political correctness, as haters who want to tear the country down and deny people their right to say what they think. Jewish people, like myself, who criticize the state of Israel or the US Jewish establishment that has bought into and upholds US empire and Zionist aggression, are denounced as self-hating Jews. Evangelicals who dare to question the hypocrisy involved in supporting a blatant racist and sexist at the helm of the government would have been excommunicated if that practice existed among Protestants. Even worse, on a certain level, is the widespread willingness, not only on the right, but throughout the population, to accept the constraints of the US political duopoly and the narrow political spectrum it legitimizes. People compare Trump to the growing trend of authoritarian leaders in other countries. But the bigger conundrum is that the so-called left, certainly the parliamentary left in the United States, is to the right of the right wing in many or most other countries. Why do we stand for this? Jimmy Carter, whom many revere today, put into motion a massive buildup in the US military and a deregulation of US industries, as well as using reactionary Muslim fundamentalists to counter social revolutionaries in Afghanistan, Palestine, and elsewhere. Bill Clinton not only served to legitimize and normalize Reaganomics, he went the Republicans one better by ending welfare as we know it, launching Operation Gatekeeper on the border, and intensifying the new Jim Crow of mass incarceration, mandatory minimum sentences, and limits on habeas corpus, or the right to appeal a sentence of death. Obama sanctioned Bush's war crimes and paved the way for Trump when he bailed out not Main Street, but Wall Street and General Motors, and passed an Affordable Care Act without even a public option, let alone universal health care for all, in a blatant giveaway to the insurance industry and big pharma. If Joe Biden, assuming what now looks like the likely victory of the Biden-Harris Democratic ticket, holds up, is not going to be the president who normalizes Trumponomics, who legitimizes the new Cold War against China with our European imperial allies, who uses the totally inadequate Paris Accord and a PR move like stopping fracking on federal land while allowing it elsewhere to quiet demands to keep fossil fuels in the ground. The president who substitutes police reforms, training, and increased funding for the cry to end racist policing. If Joe Biden is not to be that president, the responsibility sits squarely on our shoulders to overcome the desire to sit back and heave a sigh of relief at his election. Our long national nightmare is not over. The political, economic, environmental, psychological, and spiritual crises of this society are only going to deepen unless we act. We are like the dog that has internalized the radius of its leash. We have lost a sense of our own collective power, agency, and creative capacity to build a different way of life based on solidarity with all humanity and harmony with all the rest of nature and creation. We identify with our oppressors, and that is not true only for the authoritarian personality structures on the right who mistook Trump for a strong man because he plays one on TV, but for the people of goodwill and good intentions who have become compliant to the limits on freedom and on the imagination that this system imposes. Imagine if just 10% of the 70 million people who voted for Biden were in the streets today or tomorrow, as the women of Poland most recently have been, demanding that militarism and mass incarceration be defunded, that the fossil fuels stay in the ground, that the country repair the damages it has done through land theft and genocide, racial chattel slavery and institutionalized racism, that healthcare, housing, and education are human rights, that women should be able to control their own bodies and their reproductive capacity, that working people have the right to dignity, safety, and control of their workspaces and work processes. What a wonderful world it would be. More than half a century ago, Martin Luther King said that this nation was approaching spiritual death. If we do not admit that that prophecy has already been fulfilled, we will never solve the problem or revive its spiritual, emotional, and moral life. Thank you.